The rain came without warning. It was supposed to be a bright morning, a day of new beginnings for James and Diep as they moved into their small countryside house. The sky had been blue when they started carrying furniture, their laughter echoing through the quiet fields. But by noon, dark clouds rolled in like heavy curtains, swallowing the light, and within moments, a downpour crashed down upon them. James hurried to cover the boxes with a plastic sheet, while Diep ran to gather the things left outside. Her hair clung to her face, her dress soaked through, yet she smiled faintly when their eyes met. The rain splashed against their legs, cold and relentless, but neither of them stopped. They had been through worse storms than this, storms of life, not just weather. "Come inside, you'll get sick," James shouted over the sound of the rain, his voice carrying both care and command. "I'm fine," Diep replied, her laughter carried by the wind. "We need to get this bed frame in before it's ruined." James sighed and ran to help her. Together, they lifted the heavy frame, water dripping from their sleeves, their fingers brushing for just a second, a touch that felt warm even in the freezing rain. Inside the small, unfinished house, the sound of rain on the tin roof echoed like drums, filling the air with both chaos and comfort. Diep's clothes were soaked through. She shivered, her lips slightly pale. James quickly lit a fire using dry wood he had kept under the stairs. The orange light flickered across their faces, chasing away the shadows. "You never listen," he said softly, handing her a towel. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "If I did, would you still find me interesting?" James chuckled, despite the exhaustion, despite the storm. His heart swelled with a tenderness he couldn't quite describe. This woman, strong, stubborn, kind, had walked with him through every trial. He looked around at the modest home they had built together, piece by piece, dream by dream, and he felt something deep: peace. Outside, the storm roared louder. The river nearby began to swell. James stepped out to check the front gate, his shirt immediately plastered to his skin. The water had risen to his ankles, and the sky was dark as dusk, though it was only afternoon. He frowned. "This rain isn't stopping anytime soon," he murmured. When he returned inside, Diep had already started cooking rice over the small fire. The scent of chicken broth filled the room, mixing with the dampness of the rain. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said softly, glancing at him with eyes full of quiet affection. James knelt beside her, gently taking her hand. "We've come so far, Diep," he whispered. "No storm can take that away." She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. "As long as we're together, I'm not afraid of anything." The fire crackled between them. The sound of the rain outside became a song of challenge, of endurance, of love that refused to give in. Neither of them knew that before dawn, when the floodwaters would rise and the roads would disappear beneath muddy waves, someone unexpected would appear at their door. The man they least expected to see again. John and his rival, like the storm, would test their hearts in ways they had never imagined. The night deepened, and the storm only grew angrier. The rain lashed against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. The wind howled through the cracks of the wooden door, and the sound of the rising river echoed through the valley. James checked the front gate again. The water had already reached halfway up the fence. Inside, Diep sat close to the fire, holding a blanket around her shoulders. She tried to remain calm, but her hands trembled slightly every time the thunder struck. She flinched. "James," she whispered, "what if the river floods the house?" James knelt beside her, his voice steady though his eyes revealed worry. "I'll protect you. If it gets worse, we'll move to the higher ground behind the hill. Don't be afraid." They sat together, listening to the storm. Time passed slowly. Every minute felt like an hour. Then suddenly there was a loud knock at the door. Bang, bang, bang. Diep startled, her heart pounding. Who could it be in this weather? She gasped. James hesitated. No one in their right mind would be out during a storm like this. He took a stick from beside the fire, holding it like a weapon, and slowly opened the door. A shadow stood there, soaked to the bone, rain streaming down his face. Under the flashes of lightning, James froze. "John?" John looked exhausted, his clothes muddy, his face pale. "James, please, let me in." The bridge collapsed. The water swept my car away. I barely made it here. For a moment, silence filled the space. Between them, years of rivalry, betrayal, and pain hanging heavy in the air. Diep stood up slowly. Her lips parted in disbelief. "John," she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. James's jaw tightened. Memories of John's deceit, the business sabotage, the heartbreak, the danger he had brought into their lives, flashed in his mind. Yet, as another crack of thunder shook the house, he saw the truth. John wasn't a threat tonight. He was just a man trying to survive. "Come in," James said finally, stepping aside. "You'll freeze to death out there." John hesitated, then nodded gratefully and entered. Diep fetched a dry towel and some warm tea. The firelight flickered on John's tired face as he sat near the hearth, shivering. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice weak. James said nothing. He stood by the window, watching the rain pour down. His heart was torn. The part of him that wanted to protect Diep clashed with the part that refused to abandon a man in need. Diep placed a bowl of hot soup in front of John. "You should eat," she said softly. John looked at her, eyes full of something strange, guilt, perhaps, or sorrow. "I didn't expect you to help me after everything that happened," he said quietly. "But I'm sorry, James, for all of it." James didn't respond right away. The fire popped. The house groaned under the wind. Then he turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Rest," he said. "We'll talk when the storm ends." And as the three of them sat in silence, the crackling fire between them, the raging rain outside, none of them knew that this night, born from chaos, would begin to change everything. Because sometimes it takes a storm to wash away the bitterness of the past, and sometimes help arrives from the one person you never thought you could forgive. The rain didn't stop. It fell harder, heavier, as if the heavens had opened their heart and refused to close it again. By midnight, the river had swelled beyond the banks, and the sound of rushing water was deafening. The lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving the house in a dim orange glow from the dying fire. James grabbed a lantern and stepped outside to check the situation. The cold wind hit his face like knives, and the rain stung his skin. What he saw made his stomach twist. The backyard was already a shallow pool, and the water was creeping toward the front steps. Inside, Diep was trying to keep calm. John sat silently, watching her as she packed a small bag of essentials, documents, medicine, and a photo of the three of them. The irony wasn't lost on him. Years ago, he had tried to destroy James's company, tried to tear apart everything that mattered to him. And now, in this fragile moment, he was sitting under the same roof, relying on the man he once betrayed. Suddenly, a loud crack tore through the air. One of the trees behind the house had fallen, smashing part of the fence. The water surged forward violently. "James!" Diep screamed. James rushed back in. "We have to move now. The hill behind the field, it's higher ground." He turned to John, his tone sharp but resolute. "Can you walk? You'll need to help me carry supplies." John nodded without hesitation. "Let's go." They stepped out into the storm, the wind howling like a wounded beast. The water was icy, rising up to their knees, then their thighs. James led the way, holding Diep's hand tightly, while John carried the bag and the lantern. Every few steps, lightning flashed, illuminating their faces, soaked, terrified, determined. But as they crossed the field, tragedy struck. The muddy ground beneath Diep's feet gave way. She slipped, her hand sliding from James's grip as the current pulled her toward the ditch. "Diep!" James shouted, his voice drowned by the storm. Without thinking, John threw the lantern aside and dove into the water. The current was strong, almost too strong, but he pushed forward with all his strength. He reached her just before she was swept away, grabbing her arm and pulling her to the surface. "Hold on," he yelled, gasping for breath. James waded through the water, fighting his way toward them. Together, he and John pulled Diep up to safer ground, collapsing under the shelter of an old tree. Diep coughed, shivering, tears mixing with the rain. James held her close, trembling. "You're safe now. You're safe." John sat a few feet away, his breathing ragged, his body shaking from exhaustion. When James looked at him, for the first time in years, there was no hatred in his eyes, only gratitude. "You saved her," James said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. John gave a faint, weary smile. "Maybe I finally did something right." The storm raged on above them, but something had shifted in the hearts below, a silent forgiveness, a bridge rebuilt by courage and rain. For the first time, James no longer saw John as an enemy, but as a man trying to make peace with his past. That night, the heavy rain did not just test love, it revealed it in the most unexpected way. The morning came slowly, wrapped in a gray mist that clung to the wet earth. The storm had passed, leaving behind a broken landscape, trees uprooted, fences washed away, and the faint smell of mud in the air. Yet, amidst the wreckage, the world seemed strangely peaceful. The sound of the river had quieted, replaced by the soft chirping of birds returning after the night of fury.
James opened his eyes to the pale dawn. He was sitting against the tree where they had taken shelter, his arms still around Diep, who had fallen asleep in exhaustion. Her hair was damp, her face pale but calm. He reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The warmth of her breathing was the sweetest proof that she was alive.
A few feet away, John sat quietly, staring at the horizon. His clothes were torn and muddy, his hands trembling slightly, but there was a calmness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. When James looked at him, their eyes met not as enemies, not even as rivals, but as two men who had faced death together and come out changed. James spoke softly, his voice rough from the night's shouting. "You didn't have to risk your life for her."
John gave a faint smile. "Maybe I did. I've spent years destroying everything good around me. I didn't want the storm to take one more thing I could have saved." There was silence between them, the kind that needed no words. Diep stirred, waking slowly. When she saw John, she sat up, her eyes filling with tears. "You saved me, after everything that happened. Why?"
John looked away, his voice low. "Because it was time I stopped running from what I did. Because you didn't deserve to pay for my hatred." Diep reached out, placing a trembling hand on his. "You've already done more than I could ever ask. Thank you, John." For a long moment, the three of them sat together, the early sunlight streaming through the clouds. Soft and golden, it painted the world anew, as if nature itself wanted to erase the darkness of the night. When they finally stood, James offered his hand to John. It was a gesture not of pity, but of peace. John hesitated, then accepted it. The handshake was firm, honest, a quiet promise that the past would no longer rule them. "I'll leave after helping fix what the storm broke," John said, his voice steady. "But I'll go as a friend this time." James nodded. "You're welcome here, John. You always were, even when I didn't want to admit it." Diep smiled softly, her hand resting on James's arm. "Maybe the storm didn't come to destroy us," she whispered. "Maybe it came to wash away the old pain." As the sun rose higher, they began to walk back toward the house. The ground was soft beneath their feet, but each step felt lighter, freer. Behind them, the storm had left its mark, but ahead, the light of forgiveness and understanding guided their path. For the first time in years, James felt that his heart and his home were truly whole again.